thank you so much, Prime Minister Barak, for being here. We meet on an auspicious day. Obviously, I think we knew it was going to be the 70th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel, but it also comes a day after a very intense news day in Israel and in Gaza. And we're going to get to all of that and talk about that news there, and also Iran and Syria and many other topics, and also take a look back at what you've titled your book, My Country, My Life, and we certainly have quite a lot to talk about there. I know we showed, as people were walking in, some of the amazing photographs that are in the memoir, and we're going to be taking a look at some of those and talking about them as well. I want to start tonight with one of my favorite quotes, I think, by Arik Sharon, where he said, what you see from here, you don't see from there. And he said that when he ascended to the prime minister's chair, right? And ever since I heard that, I've always thought about that every time I kind of change position or change jobs, and I think it's a really important item of empathy. And I guess I wonder what you saw from here, meaning from the position of writing a book, from looking back at your whole life, having left the prime minister's chair, having left the defense ministry, having left the Kiryat. What did you see from that position that you hadn't seen before about your own life and your own country?
Oh, when you come to my age and start to think of the whole life you had before you start to write, I felt it much more demanding than I thought it would be. You start to think whether things that you told yourself about yourself all along your life are really the truth. And if you want to write down the truth, it takes quite a torturing process to make sure you're writing the truth. When I worked on it, it reminded me of a conversation with Shimon Peres some 20 years ago. I was his foreign minister in his government. We flew to some capital, I can't even recall which one, and we talked. And he told me, he was about my age now then. He told me, Ehud, as long as I am active, I won't write an autobiography. I asked him why. He answered, if I have to tell the truth of what I think about all the people around me, I won't be able to be active anymore. And to make this whole effort just in order to find a way not to write the truth about what happened around me doesn't worth the effort. So I broke his thesis and did it. I found it extremely beneficial. It gave me a lot of perspective on my own life, and certain things I look at it different, especially in politics, at my time in politics, when I think of it, only now I realize to what extent I was formed by the formative years in special forces. I was the leader of our equivalent of Delta Forces or SEAL Team 6, long before those units came into existence, and later on in the Army. And these are organizations where you can take for granted the unity of purpose. And I was not aware, in spite of being exposed to politics for many years, I used to sit in cabinet meetings since the government of Menachem Begin as the head of our intelligence. I never got, until I look at it in perspective, to what extent I underestimate the need of politicians to be careless, to schmooze with, to invest time in them, and to what extent you cannot assume never the unity of purpose in our system because it is not there. And probably a second element is some events along the way, namely you mentioned Sharon, the fact that I did not make a unity government with him after the Second Intifada erupted, post-Camp David, was partly because he was in a very poor situation at the time. He begged to join the government. There was already violence in the streets, and he was ready to do almost everything we asked for. But he had only one precondition. We have to announce the peace process started in Oslo, dead. So he said it when we sat with our assistants. Later on, he repeated it when we were only the two of us in the room. So I thought that he means it. And I said, oh, if this is the precondition, we just can't work together. I'm not going to spoil everything that we have achieved in spite of the inability to have a breakthrough. I didn't realize that for Sharon to say this is a precondition doesn't mean that he really meant it. He he had to say it. And that's what his aides kept telling me in the years afterward. He had to say it. You should say yes, agree, then go a government. You are the prime minister. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And that's it. So these are the type of lessons, but it's always kind of, it never ends.
Are there any decisions that when you went back with this new eye, with this clearer scrutiny and this perspective, any decisions throughout the history that you think you would have made differently if you could go back?
No, the one I've just mentioned, I probably would have done differently. And 9 months later, there was 9/11, and the landscape changed forever. So that probably was a mistake. But basically, on the other issues, I don't look backward. I don't find any sense in it. Basically, I've done what, to the best of my judgment, based on what I've seen around at the time, I thought is the best step for, be it Israel or the completion of a mission and so on. And there is not a lot of wisdom to look at what would have you done if you have known in advance what will be the consequences, which are always uncertain. That doesn't serve any role or doesn't have any significance.
So let's talk about today, the present tense. A lot of us, spent a lot of yesterday looking at this sort of split-screen vision of Israel and Gaza, and I think this is something we talk about a lot, journalists covering. I covered two Gaza-Israel wars, and many other times you would have clashes in the West Bank and normal life on the other side. Yesterday was a particularly stark example. We had scenes that looked like a medieval battle on one screen, and then this celebratory singing of hallelujah and niceties and speeches on the other. Starting with Gaza, could it have been prevented? 60 people dead in one day, the deadliest day since the 2014 war. Was Israel using too much force? Did anything get changed in the underlying conflict there?
It's a painful result in a way. 60 people dead is 60 people too much, even 6 dead or 6 too much. But we have to understand the situation. Israel does not have a choice but to protect this border, not just on principle, for reasons that I will come to in a moment, but also because of the civilian infrastructure, the moshav and kibbutzim just be behind the fence, which is a very fragile fence, sometimes less than 100 yards. So you just cannot afford people en masse crossing it. Beyond this, especially those of us who believe in the need to end up with two-state solution, with this engagement for the Palestinian setting borders, should insist that the border will have its meaning. Technically speaking, we have several weeks to prepare, and a lot had been done, but probably it's not so easy to solve it. We have extremely sophisticated riot control means to be used against the crowd like this, several hundred people for distances of 20 or 30 yards. We do not have means to deal effectively with riots which include thousands or many thousands from distance of 300 or 400 yards. And you cannot let them come physically to the fence, because by then you lose control and much more fatalities might be the consequences. So it's a painful result. I think that the IDF leaders are now debriefing it, trying to see what could be done to minimize it even much lower when and if it repeats. But unfortunately, I cannot see an easy way to bypass it. And
the underlying conflict with Gaza?
That's answer from heaven.
Maybe that's the IDF. Do you think there's in your book, you talk about Operation Cast Lead in 2008, 2009. As I said, I covered the conflict in 2012 when I think you were still in the cabinet, and then again in 2014. Are we doomed to another bout like that? Is the underlying situation in Gaza seems only to get worse?
Quite probably. It's, every several years there is something happens there. Basically, we pulled out of Gaza. The last soldier, the last settler, we removed synagogues, even cemeteries, we call the graves. Everything was removed. Most Israel believed that this will be the end of it. So now they can start to build Singapore or Hong Kong on the Mediterranean. It ended up that within a year and a half they were taken over by the Hamas, which brutally kind of manipulate them and take all the support, allocating most of it to their defense or tunnels or whatever. So basically it's not simple. We have nothing against the Gazans. They are simple people that basically want to have a normal life, and they do not have normal life. Our struggle is with the Hamas and several other organizations of this nature. I think that besides the technical development that should be made in order to produce certain means that will block riots at 500 yards without killing the individuals who are executing it, beyond this, the Israeli government has a role to find a ways to remove, to unload the steam, the high-pressure steam within the Gaza Strip. There is very little hours of electricity, poor quality of water, very short supply, even in the hospitals. That's abnormal situation. It doesn't serve Israel in any way. And in fact, our secret service, the IDF, the coordinator of government operations in the territories, a general with his office, they are all proposing once and again to the government a set of concrete steps to reduce the tension in Gaza. And for reasons that have nothing to do with may I say, explainable considerations, the government, our government, does not approve it. So it cannot help us on this concrete event of yesterday. But if we are looking forward to the next round, I think we have to find a way to implement it. There is even a few ministers within Netanyahu's government, Likudniks, who one of them argued, for example, why the hell we don't build a big artificial island in front of Gaza and allow them to have there an airport, a seaport, both under international control for safety and probably Israeli, microphones and cameras all around, and coordinate with the Egyptians. We will let them go to the west, the Egyptians will let them go to Egypt, and it will change the situation in a dramatic manner. It always comes as a contradiction to the fact that we want to suppress Hamas, and somehow indirectly they enjoy it. But I think that the time had come to do something about it. It doesn't serve Israel this way.
I think the Trump administration has also talked about easing some of the restrictions on Gaza. Let's go to the other side of the split screen, though, to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, of course, was the sticking point in your own negotiations with Arafat in Camp David. And for years, the American presidents talked about moving the embassy to Jerusalem while they were campaigning. They then immediately abandoned that. Our United States Supreme Court ruled against allowing people to have Israel on their passports if they were born in Jerusalem, of course, and all of that has now been reversed. The embassy has been opened. Jerusalem, the United States has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and a lot of people stood up yesterday and celebrated. Was it worth it?
Yeah, of course.
Does it mean anything?
I said, for sure it means. I think that it should have happened 70 years ago. When we established the state, we announced Jerusalem, the capital, that should be the place of embassies. For sure it had to be executed 25 years ago, when the Congress on a bipartisan resolution decided it should happen. And since then, different presidents had many reasons why not to implement it. And we are thankful, and we're kind of thankful to President Trump for finally make the decision. It has certain symbolic value, not just kind of practical political value. It might bring several other countries to come, not many of them, but we should understand, we all saw the alienation that it raised among Arabs and mainly the Palestinians, but in reality, it does not exclude in any way the possibility or the kind of almost certainty that once the Palestinians will come to grips with reality and will be ready to take painful decisions and strike a deal with Israel, they will establish their state and they will choose a place to be their capital. It probably will include or might include some heavily Arab-habitated suburbs of Jerusalem or neighborhoods, and they will announce it capital, and the American embassy might be there as well. I don't see the great reason to see it as a major kind of obstacle on the way for anything in the future.
Do you think if the United States had declared Jerusalem as Israel's capital, either in 48 or 25 years ago in the Congress, and you had gone into Camp David with Jerusalem with America having it, recognized it, with the embassy being there, would that have changed the dynamic, do you think, to change the dynamic of those negotiations so that you would have gotten more progress on the Jerusalem issue?
To tell you the truth, I don't think so. I don't think that the concrete problems on the table were the real obstacle. In a way, for this negotiation, it doesn't change a lot. Basically, the discussion about Jerusalem was about where the border should be and who should control what we call the Holy Basin, the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives and so on. And it carried so much symbolic kind of weight for both sides that I don't see the presence of an American embassy making any major change. In a way, Arafat was not a perfect partner. I used to scorn with Clinton toward the end of the negotiation at Camp David that Arafat already got a Nobel Peace Prize out of all possibilities, and he probably deserved, in reality, an Oscar.
So let's turn to Iran, one of your favorite subjects. Back in 2012, you were the strongest advocate for a unilateral Israeli strike. Netanyahu, of course, decided not to do that. But then after the JCPOA was signed, you basically said this is the reality and that you thought the U.S. should stay in the deal, right? Correct?
I thought it's a bad deal, but once the president decided on it, it becomes part of reality. We demanded for American president. I had meetings on this issue with Bush Jr. and then with President Obama. And I told them very frankly that when it comes to issues where our very future and security is at stake, we cannot afford to delegate the authority to make decisions to anyone on earth, including our best allies, which happen to be you. We will take our decisions as sovereigns and will act upon them. So they didn't like my answers, but they both respected it. And I saw no question mark about the right of Israel to act as a sovereign. I used to tell Bibi and the other members of the cabinet that the same way that we expect the Americans to respect our sovereignty, we have to respect the American sovereignty. So once the American president decided, make a decision, we of course can afford going to senators, congressmen, to tell them what we think about the deal as human beings. But we can act behind the lines of an American president within the Congress to convince the Congress to act against the elected president of the United States. That, in my judgment, is crossing a thin line that should not have been crossed. So it became a fact. And now when Trump decided to pull out, I thought that the issues on the table, even the missile development, which happened not to be in the agreement, not to mention the insurgency in neighboring state or the spreading of terror, these elements are outside of the agreement. So you do not promote them by pulling out from the agreement. You can come to the Europeans, probably to Russia, and try to coordinate a common effort to tell the Iranians, okay, we have this agreement working, now we need several more issues. So I didn't see the logic behind it. But having said that, once he decided it, that's part of reality. It doesn't make any sense to keep kind of debating the previous situation. And with this new reality, I might say there is a one short-term positive result. Both the Iranians, as the North Koreans before them, became extremely cautious. You know, the president, especially now with Pompeo on one side and Bolton on the other, is totally unpredictable. And so suddenly the Iranians have to think whether is this the right time to raise tension more? Not sure. I watched them for many years as Tom Kaplan is doing very successfully. I should tell you, he's one of the brightest analysts of the Iranian kind of intentions and so on, many years. So I watched them for many years, and I noticed the real nightmare is that they will make certain mistakes that will draw them into fully fledged clash with America. The reason is that Iran will survive this clash, but the regime will not. So the Ayatollahs are afraid, as other human beings in power might be frightened as well. And now they suspect that once America is out and the rest are still in, the administration will watch carefully to identify the slightest mistake in violation of the agreement, or even in a case might be fabricated violation, because it's now fake news is not inconceivable, and then their nuclear facilities will be attacked. And so it makes them more kind of restrained. The same, in a way, happens with North Korea. It's not that the guy is planning to dismantle his arsenal. He will not do it. He will dismantle the test site, which he doesn't need anymore, because he controls the technology for atom bombs and for hydrogen bombs. There is no other third type of a bomb by now. So he has the technology, and he is afraid of a miscalculation that will end up with a full clash. So I say, why not to wait until midterm, probably until 2020, probably another 4 years. It doesn't matter. His father did it, his grandfather did it, and they did it when it's necessary for their survival.
So do you think,
there is another weak point. Think of Kim Jong-un if the meeting will happen in Singapore next month. 12th of June, they come together. The North Korean negotiators would surely at a certain point raise the question, what's the meaning of having an agreement with America if one president signs it and suddenly you can wake up with the next president, certain morning, decided to cancel it? So what's exactly the meaning of it? It's a weak point in this step.
Do you think Iran is an existential threat to Israel?
It has the potential in the long term to turn into existential threat, but they are not as of now, not as long as this deal is in power, and probably not for the several years, at least probably more than several years after it is kind of ended. Potentially they can turn into existential, but nowadays they are not existential threat. They are very weak, in fact. Their air force is extremely old. For those of you who remember Tomcat, the F-14, this is the kind of airplanes they have. They ran all around the world for some garages who produce replicas of Phantom F-4, kind of spare parts. They have very poor ground forces. They couldn't win even over the Iraqis, which is about 1/3 in size. And Their navy is very weak. I don't want to dive into it. They cannot even sincerely think of closing the Straits of Hormuz. Reason that in spite of the fact they have some 6,000 of floating mines that can navigate with GPS to block it, technically all that the free world needs is to take out some 30 super tankers per day from the Gulf. Those super tankers can easily follow 3 minesweepers, which goes ahead of them. And nowadays, with the accurate navigation, the last super tanker in the convoy doesn't miss more than 10 yards of the trajectory of the first one. So it's not dangerous in any way. And for sure, by closing the Straits of Hormuz, they will justify and legitimize a full-scale attack of the United States on their Navy, then because of the clash with the Air Force, air defense, command control, everything, the regime is over. They fully understand it, so they won't dare to try. So basically, the only thing that they can do is probably to try to explode several oil rigs or oil wells, which will be, when the fire will be put off within a few days, and to activate the Hezbollah against Israel. That the real card is the capability to activate on command, on short notice, the Hezbollah against Israel, and arguing if Americans dealing with them, that Israel was part of the collusion, so to speak. They can do it, but as we know, with Hezbollah, we might end up in a fully fledged clash as a result of an operational mistake of a young lieutenant along the border or sergeant major. It already happened. So we have to take it into account. So basically to say, not Iran, no other player in the whole region is a now existential threat to Israel. And all this talk about the risk of destruction, Ashmada, of Holocaust, and I call it the daily Hitler of the day. Every time we need another demonized rival, it could be Ahmadinejad or Nasrallah or al-Baghdadi or Bin Laden or whatever. All those elements, they are bad guys. We have to treat with them. I would not underestimate any risk. We have to prepare for everything, should be ready to defeat any enemy. But there is no need or reason to talk about existential risks which are not there, especially not to mention 38. You know, always government, even in cabinet meetings, there is tendency to mention Europe in 38. I used to tell them, what are you talking about? What a sober, open-eyed Jew had to do in 38 in Europe. He had to flee out of Europe. So what is the comparison exactly? Assume that there are many threats. So even if they materialize, all of them, we are here, we are the strongest country, we will have to change some means, some tools, some whatever, but we are not going to pack our property and move back to Northern Africa or to Eastern Europe. We are here to stay. We should be self-confident enough to lead our policies based on a strong grip of reality and what really plays for the security and future of Israel. Not frightening ourselves, not from demons from the outside, not from traitors from within. Neither is there.
So you didn't mention him by name, but you're quoting Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course, talking in this way about the next Hitler and about 1938. And I want you to tell us a little bit about him. You have a sort of a lifetime of experience with him in so many different places. You were his commander in Sayeret Matkal. You were his opponent in the 1999 election. You served in his cabinet. You knew his brother very well. I wonder, and now you say in your book that Netanyahu and his government are unmoored from the founding principles of the state, and that they have basically led Israel to its internal existential crisis, the worst crisis in its history, in your history. You're very critical, obviously, of him. You describe it as a crisis bred from his intransigence about the Palestinians. And I guess I have a few different questions, and you'll take it how you want. I wonder, first of all, did you believe Netanyahu at Bar Ilan when he talked about a two-state solution? What do you think he wants now vis-a-vis the Palestinians? What do you think will happen with the corruption investigations? And how has he lasted so long? So you could take those in turn. There's another book about Netanyahu that just came out, but...
I happen to know him from very early age, probably 20 or so, as a young officer. He was a good officer, practical, ambitious, and really good. And I met him all along my life. I defeated him in the ballots, but later on served in his cabinet. He's a serious person. He's not a lightweight. He's a thoughtful person, very knowledgeable, understands history. But he developed in the recent several years a mindset which is very pessimist, passive, anxious, and self-victimizing. And that's a quite good recipe for politics, because in politics, if you don't do anything, you can never be blamed for doing something wrong. But it's a very bad recipe for statesmanship, because Zionism from day one was based on the idea that we are going to take our fate in our hands, not waiting for heaven to solve issues for us, and act proactively in order to change reality for the better. By taking risk, it's an inevitable part of everything. Zionism always acted on the idea that sometimes the greatest risk is being unable to take one. And Bibi in the last several years acted in totally the opposite way. And it was not there all the time. We had better times. At the time that he made the Bar Ilan speech, I believe that I see the first signs of coming to grip with realities that probably are in contradiction to his worldview or his beliefs or even wishes. But as a part of the reality imperative, he's going to do it. Along the years, I developed certain kind of doubt, whether he really meant it or just said it. And as I mentioned earlier about Arik Sharon, and many other politicians have this kind of challenge of sometimes telling something that they believe uses them at the moment and does not really mean it. In the last several years, since 2015, there is for the first time a government which is purely right. You know, in Israel, usually there are coalition government. So in coalition government, you can only say, I would do this and that if just Barak would not have blocked me from within the government, or Tzipi Livni, or Yair Lapid, or whoever is from the other side. Now, for 3 years, they are alone. And it is not a secret that the very institutions of democracy in Israel are under continuous attack from within its own government, like autoimmunic kind of disease. The attacks, the fiercest attacks on our Supreme Court come from within the government, trying to pass laws that will violate be able to violate the judgments of the Supreme Court in a simple majority in the Knesset. It's the attacks against the NGOs, the civil society organization, mainly those who are dealing with human rights and equality and whatever. They are under heavy pressure from the government. The free press is a part of an attempt, on one hand, to take over, to take control through ownership of as many outlets as you can, and to suppress the left-wing kind of more liberal voices within the outlets that are already out of control. And even the ethical code, the value set of the IDF is brutally attacked in the last 2 years, since the case of Azaria, the soldier who shot someone in Hebron, and in a few other cases. So when you ask yourself, how comes that the Israeli freely elected government, it's elected government, it's a legitimate government, how comes that they attack our very institutions of democracy? The reason is very profound. It goes deeper underneath the surface into the real objectives of this government. The real objectives are to close the door on any potential opportunity for disengagement or divorce, as I call it, from the Palestinian and the establishing of two states. And it comes from deep understanding of what it means. What is the risk? I call this in my book, the real existential threat to Israel is if we fail to put a wedge on this slippery slope toward one state. What's the problem with one state? As a dream, it talks very intimately with every Jewish heart. We always wanted to have our state covering the whole biblical land. But unfortunately, in this area between River Jordan and the Mediterranean, there live 13 million people, about 6.5 million Jews, 6.5 million Arabs. If there is only one political entity reigning over this whole area, and it is called Israel, it will become inevitably, that's the key word, inevitably, either non-Jewish or non-democratic. If they will vote for the Knesset, that's a binational state overnight, and within a few years, binational state with a clear Muslim majority and permanent civil war. No one wants it. That's clearly not the Zionist dream. If they cannot vote, I don't want to say the explicit name of the system that ran in a neighboring continent in the previous century, but it's not democracy for all. Old Johannesburg was not a democracy. And because they are not stupid, members of government, especially those who are now, in a way, leading Netanyahu. In a way, he lost his full control of the right. The pressures of the extreme right direct or define the direction that Israel takes. When they think about it, it is clear that when you try to pass the legislation or adapt the practices or run the procedures that will enable a permanent control over millions of people against their will surrounded by many nations which somehow resonate with their aspirations, you will end up with means that any healthy democracy will reject. You will bring the legislation to the Supreme Court. They will throw you through the main door. You will try to pass it with a strong civil society. They will gather in hundreds of thousands the main squares of the big cities and block it almost physically. You will try to go with it deeper and deeper, and you will find the free media fighting against you, either discriminate or incriminate you or ridicule you. And at certain point, the values of the IDF will be brought into a direct, explicit clash with the values which are needed for this kind of operations. And because they understand it, they are acting to weaken all these elements, all these institutions. So I really think, I don't think that there is a deliberate conspiracy, for sure not in Bibi's mind, but there is a readiness to be led by others. I will give you just one short example. A law was brought some half a year ago, probably 8 months, by Likudniks and the extreme right that would allow Israeli authorities to confiscate in Judea and Samaria private property, mainly land, of living Palestinian individuals in an area where Israel never even claimed sovereignty. So it was clear that this is against the international law. So when it was brought to the cabinet, to the government meeting, Bibi, out of all people, told his colleagues, gentlemen, this law will take us, people around the table, to The Hague. You cannot do it in the 21st century without being ready to pay the price for it. But he's Bibi. So instead of following the sentence, knocking on the table and said, and thus, this will not be discussed today, it will not be brought to the committee of ministers that deals with law, will not be brought to the Knesset for legislation, period. That's the end. Bibi is always waiting to see what are the responses. He waited for no more than 6 hours. He got a document signed by 26 out of 30 members of Knesset of Likud, which means everyone except him, Benny Begin, of course, Stein is probably someone else, who wrote him, we demand to pass it now. And he yielded. Now, when he said we are going to The Hague, even Bennett and Ayelet Shaked, the most extreme right-wingers, agreed. But then they decided to go to the Knesset passage. Of course, don't delude yourself. It won't pass. But the political leadership was unready to take responsibility for the decision not to pass a law that might bring the leadership to The Hague. They want the law to be passed, and then the Supreme Court will use its authority to cancel it. So that's not exactly the behavior of leadership, and it tells the story of how far we deteriorated from the practices and norms that was our kind of way of life for decades.
I have what I now think is a very 92Y question that might be on the mind of many in this crowd, and I think you can answer it with a yes or no answer. Is Trump good for the Jews? And no, look, President Trump has said so many times that he is the best friend Israel has ever had, that he's going to make the deal to end all deals, that he's done things like move the embassy, of course, and declared Jerusalem the capital. A lot of people think he's trying to out Netanyahu. Is that what Israel needs? Is this kind of a best friend?
Look, all American presidents ended up being good friends of Israel. I always thought that it represents or reflects somehow deep popular support for Israel and bipartisan support for Israel, which I hope we will be able to nurture for the future. In the Middle East, some of his positions, even those who were questionable in other corners of the world, for example, he announced in his inauguration speech that America ceased to be the kind of moral beacon for the whole world for freedom, liberty, human rights, so on, and will cease to be the policeman of the world. But when he came, and it will make America, but no other way, it will make America less influential and weaker on the world arena. And because there is no vacuum on the world arena, some practical opportunity will be taken by the Russians, and the overall landscape will be free for China to start its ascendance to prominence much earlier. So I don't think that it serves America. But when he came to the Middle East with the same set of ideas, it sounded quite reasonable. He basically told the people, okay, start with this nation building. We failed from the neoliberal and neo-conservative side and from the ultra-liberal, it didn't work. Leave aside nation building, leave aside all these human rights, democracy, whatever. Let's focus on the concrete issues. Let's fight together radical Muslim terror. Let's corner or put at bay the Iranian hegemonian and nuclear intention. That sounds quite reasonable and basically point to an opportunity that is there long before he came to power for 3 or 4 years, which I think our government is missing. That's the opportunity to ride on the common interest we have now with the moderate Sunnite regimes in the region, Emirates, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and to work together to arrange a regional deal where we will together fight this radical Muslim terror and put at bay Iran with all its intention and join hands in huge infrastructure projects which are needed, energy, water, communication, transportation, you name it. The only obstacle to achieve it, and it's very important to achieve it because with the Palestinians we always argue with certain kind of reason that to the Palestinians, we can only give. They cannot give us anything. You cannot get anything from them. But from the Arab world, you can get a lot. You can get recognition, normalization, kind of acceptance into the family of nations, of the moderate nations of the region, and huge economic and other opportunities. So why don't we do it? Because it cannot fly, this idea of a regional arrangement without Israel making sincere steps toward the Palestinians. The reason is not that the Arab leaders have a love affair with the Palestinians. They do not have. The reason is that their peoples have. And the Arab moderate leaders do not feel safe in their own seats if they engage in Israel publicly, and the Palestinians are still under our kind of full, daily, permanent control. So we are missing an opportunity that, in a way, the Trump administration pointed to. We still have to wait to see what Kushner and Greenblatt will produce. I hope they will produce something that will be even-handed enough, taking into account our strategic consideration, but leave certain place for the other side considerations, and that it will be something that will be pushed assertively into getting answers. But I should tell you that I'm not extremely optimistic, because the loss of any trust between the two sides reached a point where whenever you put something on the table, so what really goes through the minds of the leaders is not what is the opportunity there, but how to play the blame game from day one. How to maneuver so that when it comes to a dead end, we will be the side who can say yes, but, and the other side will have to say no, not the other way around. And when this is the whole tactics and all the energy invested in this, it reduces dramatically the chances of having a genuine breakthrough.
Thank you for that. So as you may have seen, I got handed a stack of cards with really some excellent questions. If you saw me put some aside, it's only because Prime Minister Barak has already answered them. The last one was about whether the warming of relations with the Arab states could help with a peace agreement. I do have one here that I think really may be a one-word answer, so I'm going to test you. Do you see anyone on the Palestinian side who could negotiate a peace agreement with the Israelis?
When the time will be ripe, there will be one. I don't believe in this kind of deterministic history that Israeli government, probably duly so, shaped a judgment that at the present they don't have a partner for whatever reasons. Abu Mazen is declining. He probably doesn't remember the recent years, but remember his PhD dissertation from many years ago about the kind of anti-Semitist kind of idea. So he made many mistakes recently, but probably he's declining. I cannot pass a judgment on this. When I said no partner, there is an urban legend that Barak basically blocked the whole opportunity for peace by announcing at the end of Camp David there is no partner. It's not true what I've said. There is no partner in Arafat at the present time, which is an objective description of the situation. It doesn't mean that there will be no partner at the long way when they are ripe. I think that for next month or next quarter, it doesn't seem very probable.
Maybe I'll add to this
question.
But
we should never lose sight of it. While developing ourselves, strengthening ourselves, and being aware of all the threats, we should never lose sight of what waits us downstream, never to close the door on this option, because the alternative is an existential risk to Israel. And when you ask yourself, as an American citizen, what Israel could have done more in order to promote this operation or option and not closing the door, look at the site of Commanders for Security of Israel. This is a group of hundreds of the top leaders of the IDF, the Secret Service, the police, and the Mossad, who 90% of them believe that there are many practical steps that should and could be taken. It's quite overlapping the proposal that the services themselves are proposing, and for some reasons they are not being dealt with or answered.
So I'm an editor now by profession, so I'll edit this question a little bit. Do you see anyone on the Israeli side who could not just negotiate a peace agreement, but who could win a mandate to negotiate a peace agreement?
It brings us back to the question of relationship between leadership, those who are led, and the circumstances. When all these three elements are ripe and it will happen at a certain point, there will be a possibility. I don't buy these ideas that there is no way to do it anymore, that we cross the point of no return. It's not true. Anyone who have certain kind of understanding or acquaintance with history, look at what happened in Northern Ireland. I spent several days in Belfast. No one believed that it could be solved, but it is basically solved, almost solved. Go and see former Yugoslavia, Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, whatever. No one believed it could be solved. It somehow solved. So whenever there are serious human beings, whenever there is understanding, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a question with the Gazans. We have with the Hamas. We don't have a question with Iran. We have problems with the Ayatollahs. Don't exclude any possibility. It's fully conceivable, and when the time will be ripe, it will be done against the expectation of those doomsayers who say that nothing can happen. It's even objectively not true.
So who should be the next prime minister of Israel?
The one who will be elected by the people.
No fun at all. Okay. So this is a question from the audience. You've accomplished so much, and yet so many Israelis of all political stripes have an unfavorable view of you. There's no attribution to that statement. What did you misjudge the most about Israeli society, and what did they misjudge about you?
No, I cannot answer this very objectively, but first of all, I always respected the decisions of our people. I never looked backward with any kind of a drop of bitterness or whatever. I did what I thought was the best for Israel. I came to power as a prime minister quite directly as a result of the assassination of Rabin, who was my commander, my mentor, and at the end, my friend. And I basically adopted his attitude towards sitting in the chair of prime minister. The question is, are you there in order to survive in the seat to the longest period you can maneuver to stay there? Or are you there in order to use the power that it gives you in order to change reality for the better? Rabin had a clear vision of it, and I adopted that vision, that there is no meaning for sitting in the chair of the Israeli prime minister unless you are ready to take risk in order to change reality. He paid much higher irreversible price than I did. In fact, all along my term, I was asked once and again by political colleagues and rivals, sometimes by commentators, why do I stick my neck so far out? I used to answer that I took much higher risks all along my life, much more irreversible ones, for much lesser causes. In some operation, however important, it's just a small operation. So I never regretted what I've done. I tried to convince my party what should be done, and I failed to convince my camp, the left camp. With the right wing, of course, I have different positions, but I enjoy their quite high respect on the right side. On the left side, I found certain elements which I couldn't overcome, at least until now. Probably I will never overcome. There is a profound difference between the political character of right and left, not just in Israel, probably here and all around the world. The right-wing supporters behave like football club fans. They are always ready to support their team. They never lose trust of the team, even if they lose 3 times in a series. They are always ready to jump on the referee, to strangle him, to remind him what his mother was doing when she was young, and everything. as needed. Left wing behave like a debate class in an Ivy League university. You sit in air-conditioned rooms with top-quality people, and you discuss normative issues, how the world should have looked like, not how it really ran, and what should be done in order to come out to the street to grab power and change the direction. And that's a malaise that's not easy to correct and responsible for successes of right wing in many countries now. In fact, when you look even deeper, you see a difference in the value set and value matrices that are part of the political mind of left and right. The left see the liberal values, the values of the individual, the Hillel, the elder, or the categorical imperative of Kant, a certain element of fairness, I don't cheat on you, don't cheat on me, and a very general concept that freedom is better than oppression. With these three elements, you can land in Manhattan, in Berlin, in Paris. You are among colleagues, liberals. It doesn't mean that they will help you if you really need help, but spiritually, you have colleagues. You are part of a big... the right wing, they identify those values, they know to respect them, but they have much more important values in their metrics. These are the values of community. Pride and loyalty to your group, accepting a leader, the authority of a leader, and holding certain things sacred. You don't question anything every morning. Certain things are sacred, you don't touch them. These elements, which we liberals usually to look kind of like patrons on some primitive residues of evolution, like, I know, how it's called, the dead part of the intestines or the nipples on males. It's there, but it's going to change. They don't need it, really. That's a grave mistake. It's something that developed over millions of years of evolution without loyalty to the group. Even the hunters-gatherers could not survive. Loyalty to the group, if you are 150 individuals, you need a leader. Otherwise, you spread over the whole area, you cannot succeed. And holding certain things sacred is important as well. So I think that we need, in the bringing back to power, the liberal power, both here in Israel and in many other countries. It's a wave now. It's not just short perturbation on the long arc that inevitably bend toward the enlightenment and advance. It's a real challenge, what happens now, and it cannot be tackled without sincere thoughts of the roots of the weakness of the left and readiness to work on ourselves to correct it and go with a different, assertive, fighting spirit to win elections in the streets.
I want to bring up some of the photographs from your book. You can get the first slide. Maybe? Yes. So this is Bina, the Mitapela, and the children's house at your kibbutz where you grew up. And I want to...
I'm the one at the first, at her end.
Of course. Where else would
I
you
was
be?
the younger boy, yeah.
So as you write in your book, you grew up in a very traditional children's house, a traditional kibbutz, socialist...
Nursery.
Yeah. Children's house. You spent, time in your group and not with your parents individually. You slept there. When you were sick, you were there. All this. It's interesting to me. You have a fairly positive, romantic retelling of this in the book, although there's been so much revisionist history about this. All, kibbutzim have stopped having children's houses. There was this movie recently, I think Children of the Sun, which was a very critical look back at this period. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about this children's house in specific, but also really your roots in the kibbutz, because it strikes me, when you talk about left and right, to me, you're a football fan trying to lead a debate club. That's part of your challenge, right? But your roots as a labor leader in the Labor Party is very much about kind of where you were born, I think, right? It was almost never questioned by you that you grew up on a labor kibbutz, you were going to be in the Labor Party. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about Bina and the Children's House and the kibbutz and your origins.
You know, to those of you who are not acquainted with the old kibbutzim, not the present version is a kind of a community that lives with very little things in common or in commune. They just live together in high quality environment. But at the time, it was like a permanent summer camp for adults. It was totally deprived of any aspect of civilization. My parents had one room, 12 on 10 feet, not even a place to a queen-size bed, not to mention king-size bed. The two beds were under each other, and you would make it for night. Of course, not a place for myself. I was the oldest son of my three younger brothers. So we were brought up in nurseries. There was, in the room of my parents, there was no running water, no toilets, no shower, nothing, just a room. And we were brought in those nurseries together with a small group of kids, far from our parents. Of course, we saw them 2 hours every evening, and in a weekend, a one-day weekend. I saw socialism from close distance. When you look at it from very close distance about this aspiration, not just to be pioneers for the Zionist project, but also to change the nature of human beings, you see the failure from close distance because it cannot work. And you develop certain kind of reservations, let's say, about these ideas of everyone does or contributes to the extent he can and get whatever he wants. But as a second generation of pioneers who basically sacrificed their life in order to serve a cause bigger than or greater than themselves, we also got some of these motivation to contribute. We didn't want to build a new kibbutzim. There were already several hundreds of them, in spite of the fact that altogether we were not more than 2 or 3% of the population, but clearly the avant-garde. And so we found our way into the army. The armed forces was the upward mobility kind of opportunity. But I should tell you the truth that no one, neither Bina nor my parents would never believe that I would become a special forces commander or a general or whatever. My father probably thought of me as a future scientist at most. But I was very shy, very introvert kind of boy, very non-athletic. Most of the girls ran 60 yards faster than I could. And I played soccer only on the defense, and my expertise was to kick, trying to kick the ball, but Andy got in the knee of the offense of the other team, so they tried to avoid tackling me. I was avid reader, almost obsessed reader of books of all types. Then I played the piano rather than playing basketball. So no one would predict it, but it was so important to us to be there. So gradually, when I became a teenager, I started to look, how can I express myself? And I found through some paramilitary training that was open to all youngsters at the high school, that I'm quite good in something that could not predict. That's to know where I am, to always be oriented and to navigate very easily. I looked at the map, I just see what could be seen from there. There was no GPS at the time, and it was a major issue just to know, especially at nighttime when there is no moon, where are you on the map and how to come from here to there. I found a great edge in it, which I used later on. But in fact, my trajectory in life, being taken into this embryonic Special Forces unit, came from another curiosity of myself. I met, even in the kibbutz, with all the communal property, doors that were locked with locks. For example, the armory of the kibbutz, where the weapons were, was locked. You cannot take a rifle and go to shoot. The watermelons were locked. The new kind of group, cases of watermelon. The chocolates were locked. So I started to look at the locks. I cut some of them to try to understand what's going inside, why you cannot just turn it. And when I realized, I start to kind of trial and error process until I found a way to open them. I became a very successful lock picker.
Very valuable on the kibbutz.
Yeah, in the kibbutz. So first of all, it became very important. You know, everyone goes, door is locked, they have to wait for me. I'm the only one who can open it and go beyond. I developed even certain tendency for juvenile delinquency, you call it, I believe, with some events not very sympathetic. At one place, when the country was 10 years old, there was national exhibition of the achievements of Israel at 10. Part of it was the the Israeli military industries. So they had several Uzis, the submachine gun, in their exhibition. When I visited, I saw that there is no one controls the place. So I came again, brought 2 guys to keep the corners, and we grabbed a weapon for ourselves. And that, together with some other achievements, we got an arsenal of weapons and ammunition, whatever. And it was found that some days, the metapelet of the time tried to pull one of these boxes from underneath our beds in the dormitory and fell on the cart. It was too heavy. She brought her son-in-law, they opened it, and immediately they found that the young kids have an arsenal of weapons, pistols, submachine guns, munition, hand grenades, whatever. So, of course, in the kibbutz at the time, they did not report it to the police because it would be a shame for the kibbutz. But they allowed the older courts to teach us a lesson by taking us and in front of the rest to hit each and every one of the small group. We were 4. But fortunately enough, this evening, I was taking once a week a piano lesson in Tel Aviv. So I was out of it, so I was saved from the house.
So let's go to the next slide. This is, of course, a few years later with the Sabina rescue. And I just have a couple of questions that are related. Somebody wants to know, what is your favorite memory from your Army days? I don't know if Sabina is one of them.
I have too many.
Somebody asks, not about this operation, but about the Lebanon operation. On a lighter note, what was it like to dress as a woman?
Yeah, if it serves the mission, I had everything in place, and a lipstick and blue and under the eyes. We took on the missile boat 2 of the young girls who worked with us in the unit to help us. The three soldiers which were chosen to be girls. We were chosen according to our faces. I was the commander of the unit, probably the oldest guy around, but I had a baby face without this beard. So I found myself a woman. So we basically came there after midnight and sent the squads into the different buildings. And I stayed at the street level with a stocky blonde besides me. And within a minute, we saw the door open of one of the cars on the other side of the street, and a heavy bodyguard came out of it and pulled the gun from opened his jacket, pulled the gun, and started to cross the street toward the 2 ladies that were walking in front of the entrance. when he was some 10 yards from us, I murmured to the blonde, no choice. And to this day, I remember the shock in his eyes. We could see him when he saw the two young women open their jackets, pulling a submachine gun and start to shoot at him. He rolled back into the car, and from the other side, there was very close a armed police station, so Land Rovers started coming every minute or so. Another car, within 2 minutes, there was a fighting from 25 yards, exchanging fire. To cut a long story short, 7 minutes after we started shooting, it was over, the 3 terrorists killed. We were back on our way to the sea. 30 minutes after we landed in the shores of Beirut, we were back swimming toward the small dinghies that took us to the missile boat. It was a very successful operation, but as could be said about this one as well, it never stopped terror. We should have no illusions. However brilliant operation, the impressive operation you make, it won't stop on its own. Terror, it's a generational war. This one is a different story that I was also the commander of this Special Forces unit here, disguised as a maintenance crew leader in white overall with all my other guys. They landed in Israel. We never experienced it, so we made improvised training of some El Al similar airplanes in a big hangar. Within few hours, we thought we prepared. We couldn't get approval to storm it at night. And then we had to invent this idea of faking release of terrorists. We made the whole show. We brought Israeli soldiers with uniforms of the prison and put them far enough that their faces could not be exactly observed, and dragged an El Al airplane, prepare for them a whole show that we are preparing the rescue and taking off together. And we came just to prepare their own airplane, the Sabina airplane with over 100 passengers and weapons and explosives and hand grenades inside. We came to prepare it. And while preparing it, we assaulted it, we stormed it. It took some 90 seconds before shooting was over. We killed 2 of these terrorists, captured another 2. We saved all the passengers but 1. We had only 1 young officer slightly wounded in his hand from our own fire, from his colleague. His name was, the name of the wounded officer was Benjamin Netanyahu, the future prime minister. He was a young commander, a young officer in this operation. And once again, this also, it was very impressive, but it didn't stop terror. The real lesson is that it needs persistence. It needs readiness to find. Everyone learn from operation to operation. It's not only we which draw lessons. The other side, the terrorists are drawing their own lessons, becomes more and more sophisticated, more and more complicated, and the fight is going on until now.
So we're running out of time. I'm going to ask one more question and then show one more picture, and then we'll go. This is, again, an audience question. Was there one particular moment at which you realized the 2000 Camp David summit would not end with an agreement? And then in parentheses, or do I just need to read the book?
You better read the book anyhow.
Although you gave away the whole Locke story. That was a big part of it.
I'm not sure that there was a single moment. In fact, I couldn't know whether we will succeed or not. I was very doubtful even before then. So the question why I did it at all.
I mean, actually, in your retelling of this, I would say throughout the summit, you seem quite doubtful that it will.
Yeah, even before. You know, I basically thought, I always considered the alternatives. It was, when I came to power, it was 6 years after Oslo started, 3 years after the nominal date we had to start permanent status negotiation, and already 6th or 7th years of Clinton. And it was clear that once he will leave, another one will come. You cannot know who he will be, but it might take half a year or a year before he comes to any clear policy. And the deep understanding of Clinton of the whole issues and details, and the fact that he was perceived as a fair kind of honest broker was very important. So I decided to move on. The fact was that I predicted long before that we are heading into this kind of inevitable collision with the Palestinians. Even when I was heading the opposition, I compared the Netanyahu government, it was at the time, to a group of silent lamps on the deck of the Titanic. I approached one by one the generals. I called them publicly, called Arik, Sharon. No way that you don't see the iceberg. Raful, don't way another general, Itzik Mordechai, another general. And even Bibi, he was just a captain, but also he has some experience. No way that they do not see that it will inevitably end with a huge, violent clash. So the only way was trying to avoid it. And in this regard, it was, I compared it to a two families' cottage that start to get on fire. And both heads of families coming from both sides to try to put it out. One of them even already carried the medal of world-known firefighter, the Nobel Peace Prize of Arafat, but you don't know if not the arsonist with the gasoline and the match in his pocket. So you cannot know. I didn't know. When the journalists asked me, what will happen? They assume that I know something that they do not know. I told them it's 50-50, not because I know something that you do not know, because there is only two possibilities. Either it fails or succeed. But we have to try it, because otherwise we will reach the inevitable explosion, and we will never be able to tell ourselves that it could not have been avoided by just a genuine, sincere attempt to reach breakthrough. So whenever people used to say, okay, but you tried a peace and you ended up with violence. The people in a simple thinking create a causal chain. You tried to negotiate, it failed, kind of violence came. I have to say it was the British philosopher Hume who once said that the fact that the rooster calls and later on the sun rises doesn't mean that the rooster raised the sun. It just happened one before the other. And in a way, I used to scorn my critiques from the right wing, telling them, I know what you might have said even about Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion, when he accepted the partition plan, which decided on a Jewish state and Arab state, the Jewish state looked very bad. It looked 3 cantons hardly connected, without even Jerusalem, without corridor to Jerusalem. And Ben-Gurion accepted it on behalf of the Zionist movement. You would have said the Palestinian and the Arab world saw this weak person who could not stand the pressures and accepted this humiliating deal. And of course, they jumped on to seize the opportunity and destroy Israel before it could stand on its feet. But we know that the opposite is true. It's exactly the far-sightedness of Ben-Gurion, who was ready to accept it and let the burden of disapproval fall on and the responsibility for whatever follows fall on the shoulders of the Palestinians and the Arab world, which make us capable of holding until now all the achievements of the War of Independence, which dramatically widened our control.
Okay, so I want to flip through a couple of slides. We're going to go, this is in Stanford. We'll go quickly. And then this is you casting your vote for Rabin. We were going to talk about Rabin, but we ran out of time. It's okay. Rabin and Peres with you. And now with President Clinton. And then we'll stop on the next one. So this is, you started playing the piano when I think you were 8. And you are quite an accomplished pianist. and you...
I'm an amateur, but you play.
I'm told you're okay.
It's another legend. There are many legends about myself. Some of them are not true.
And I think when you first met Arafat, he walked in on you playing the piano.
Yeah.
I just would love you to tell us a little bit, we don't have much time, but a little bit about what this hobby, what it means, why you've kept it up, how you play now, what's going on with the
This piano is a small Steinway at the residence of the Prime Minister. When I ended my term as Chief of Staff, the Ramatkal, Rabin was the Prime Minister, and he and Leah, his wife, had a reception for me in exactly this residential living room of the residence of the Prime Minister. And she asked that I will play a little bit on the piano, and I played some pieces. And I noticed that it is not tuned. So whenever I later was asked, why do you run for premiership of Israel? I used to answer, in order to be able to order to tune the piano, the Steinway. And so I came, I was playing. I played from 8 until almost 17 when I left to the army. And as I just told you, it saved me from some troubles and getting some blows. And I enjoyed it very much all my life. I stopped playing for 20 years. But when my eldest daughter reached the age of 8, I bought for her a piano, and suddenly I started to come back. And since then, she's now almost 48. So in the last 40 years, I playing, not very much when I was in power, but much more when I'm free. One of the first things I made after I left the role of Prime Minister is to buy a Steinway. I checked here in New York, in the 57th or whatever, there are certain, there is Steinway shop. I couldn't find one, so I went to Hamburg. I chose certain piano. I told them, send it to Israel to your agent, and I will buy it there. And since then, I play a lot and enjoy it very much. It's everyone who plays, either piano or violin, you know that it's a gift. It's a gift for life. It gives you very few things make me so relaxed and enjoyed and just playing the piano. And I'm not a real pianist, but I choose more and more demanding pieces. Many of you probably saw the film The Pianist, about a survivor of a Holocaust guy who had to play to the Gestapo officer. So the piece that he plays is a ballad in G minor of Chopin. That's the piece that I now practice. It's quite a demanding one, but I enjoy it.
Thank you very much for the conversation. Thank you all for your questions.
Thank you.